Okay, in this lesson, we're going to talk about how to play the changes using two scales, the swing scale and the altered sound. And if you want to check out a transcription of the solo that I just played, you can click on the link below or the link on screen, sign up for my weekly updates, and download a PDF with the tab of that solo, tab and notation. And if you missed the first couple lessons in this series, there's some links to those below as well. So in this lesson, we're going to look at how to fit the altered scale into the scheme of things. When you're playing on a swing style blues or a jump blues, there's usually just four chords to think about: the 1 chord, the 4 chord, the 2 chord, and the 5 chord. But when you get into playing in more of a bebop way of looking at the blues chord changes, there's also a 6 chord, which in the key of B flat would be G7. Which is usually played as an altered sound, which means you're taking a G7 and you're adding one or more of these notes: the flat 13, the flat 9, and or the sharp 9. So we need a sound that's going to address all of that. And first, though, let's talk about where that chord falls in the chord progression. So it's bar 8. So if you're going along like this, here's the 4 chord, back to the 1 chord. Now we're coming up on the second line. Here's the 4 chord again. And then we're back to the 1. And now instead of just waiting here before we go up to the 2, now we're going to go down to the 6 chord, G7, and there's other ways to get in and out of that chord, but the simplest way is just to think that we're going from B flat down to G7. And the G7 is there because the bebop musicians, nearly all of them, came out of the swing era. They would learn to play swing first, that was their language, and then bebop developed out of swing. So this idea of having the 2 chord go to the 5 chord, that's super familiar to anybody who's developing bebop, and they're thinking now, well, how do I get to the 2 chord? What's a way I can set up the 2 chord? And the idea is to say, well, what if this was the home chord, if C minor was 1, if this was the chord we were trying to get to, what's the 5 of that? And the 5 of C minor is G7. And for reasons I'm not going to get into the details about right now, if you're trying to play the 5 chord of a minor chord, that 5 chord wants to have these altered sounds like the flat 9, the sharp 9, the flat 13. So the bebop guys are thinking, okay, we're going to play 5 of C minor, which turns out to be in the key of B flat. That's the 6 chord, G7. So we need a way in bar 8 to get from that, something we can play over the G7. And so, as I learned to play some of this stuff, I always was like, man, it's so awkward. Like, where can you get, you don't want to just climb down here. There's got to be a closer place to get the G. And I finally realized if you look at it in terms of triads and you just stick to, say, the 4th, 3rd, and 2nd string, that you can get from B flat sounds here to G sounds right here. You just go to this G triad. This grabs the most important notes of the G chord. Here's the 3rd, here's the 5th, and here's the root of G. So it's just a fret away from everybody's, well, certainly my favorite happy, comfortable home place when I'm playing the blues. So here's a place to get the outline of the 6th chord, the G. And the first thing to reach for, as far as playing over a new chord and improvising single note lines, to me, is to grab the chord tones. So here we've got those, and now we need to fill in some scale steps. And so we could start going up the G scale. Here's the 3, here's 4, here's 5, 6, flat 7, root, and 9. And you can still see the chord tones, and we're filling in scale steps in between. But since it's an altered chord we're playing over, we want to alter the necessary chord tones. And so to do that, we still play 3, 4, 5, but we flat the 6, which is the same thing as the 13. So there's flat 13, here's the flat 7, here's the root, and now instead of playing 9, we're going to flat the 9. So these are easy to remember because here's the root, here's flat 9, a half step above. Here's the 5th, here's flat 13, a half step above. And here's the 3rd, and here's the 4th, a half step above. So easy to remember if you can picture the shape. And then here's flat 7, which is just part of the G7 chord. So that's half of it, right? Those are the notes. Well, that's a third of it. You got to know the notes. You have to have a way to get into those notes. And then you have to have a way to resolve them to where you're going. So let's talk about how to get into them. If you're here, the B flat and the G they share a common tone, this note right here. So this note that you land on all the time playing blues is shared with the G. So one really easy way to get into the G altered sound is just change your fingering here, and instead of hammering on or sliding into the 3rd with your middle finger, just slide up from what was just the flat 3rd of B flat into what's now the 5th of G. So, and now we've got access to all the G stuff. Like that, or like this, or. And so to bail out of the G sound, we could reach down. And so here's flat 9 to root of G. And what's great about that is now we're back in a position where it's easy to grab notes of the C minor. So let's talk about the C minor for a second. We want to resolve to a chord tone of C minor, because that sounds like we've really landed on the C minor. So here's the root, the flat 3rd, the 5th, and the flat 7 of C minor, and then there's the 9th. And if we want to go around again, here's a C and here's an E flat, there's the flat 3rd of C minor again, and here's the 5th again, and here's the flat 7 again. And so, for whatever reason, if you listen to the people who play in this sort of like bebop version of the blues, you'll hear them reaching not so much for the root of C, but starting their phrases or ending them on the flat 3rd and going up as far as the 9th. So the sort of default arpeggio in bebop for playing a minor 7 sound, that's a 2 sound, is not root 3, 5, and flat 7, but 3, or really flat 3, 5, flat 7, and 9. So if we are playing on the B flat and then into the G7 altered, and then we can land here on the flat 3rd of C minor 7, it's going to sound great because it's going to set us up for some kind of 2-chord lick. So you want to think about how you're going to get in and how you're going to get out, because I know for me, if I would learn like a cool lick, and then I would go to try to play it when I was, playing a gig or whatever, and it's like I practiced the lick, but I didn't practice the context, and so it was useless. I couldn't get to it, So I always think when you get a new piece of vocabulary, it's really good to think about, well, how am I going to get into it? How am I going to get out of it? And so here's one way, right from here. And there's other ways to get in and out of it, but if you're just starting to get like some altered sounds going on, having one way that you can get in and out of is better than having 3 ways you can practice, but none of which you can actually execute when you're playing. So here's a good way to get in and out, and there's a couple variations, one of which I just played. So here's doing a hammer-on pull-off to the flat 13 and back, and then around to the natural 2, which in context is okay because you're gonna climb chromatically up to the flat 3, and then down to flat 9 to the root, the flat 7, and then resolves to C minor. Or you could go up, and where to get that, how to finger that. If you do that, that's flat 9 to root, and there's, flat 9 to root, flat 7, and then now you can grab the flat 3rd here. So to your 2 lick that's going to take you into the blues and back around to the 1. So playing the changes with 2 scales just means you're going to use that swing scale I talked about in a previous lesson to pull out chord tones from the root, from the 1 and the 4, and then to play through the 2, 5 around to the 1, and then use this new altered sound whenever you get to the 6 chord, and that's pretty much the whole thing. So again, you can go sign up and download the notation and tab for the solo I opened with, just to see this kind of really up close and note for note, so you can just sort of have that in your hands, and then leave any comments or questions you've got down below, and I'll see you next time.